Madam President,
Sergeant at Arms.
we have a distinguished guest, Senior Enlisted Advisor to the Joint Chief of Staff, Command Sergeant Major John Wayne Troxell.
Sergeant at Arms, please have our distinguished guest escorted to the head table.
Command Sergeant Major John Wayne Troxell is the Senior Enlisted Advisor to the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. As a senior non-commissioned officer in the U.S. Armed Forces, he serves as a principal military advisor to the Chairman and to the Secretary of Defense on all matters involving joint and combined total force integration, utilization, health of the force, and joint development for enlisted personnel. Command Sergeant Major Troxell enlisted in the U.S. Army in September of 1982 as an armored reconnaissance specialist and graduated from training at Fort Knox, Kentucky. Command Sergeant Major Troxell has served in the Army for over 30 years in numerous units throughout his career. Command Sergeant Major Troxell's 5 combat tours include making a combat parachute jump in service on Operation Just Cause in Panama, Operation Desert Shield Storm, 2 tours in Operation Iraqi Freedom, Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan.
Thank you. Please welcome Command Sergeant Major Troxell.
Thank you so much. If you don't mind, all right. Well, good morning, everybody. I hope you can hear me out there. All right, it is truly an honor for me to be here today, to be a part of the Enlisted Association of the National Guard of the United States. One, because the EANGUS is a great organization, but also because it's taken place in the great state of Iowa. And I'm a guy that grew up in Davenport, Iowa, you know, and cut my teeth down on River Drive down in Davenport prior to joining the military when I was 18, and I've been doing this ever since. So it's great to be back in God's country. And so I got to tell a quick story. Where's all the Iowa folks at in there? All right, okay. So I've been doing this thing for 37 years now, and I've always tried to be that senior enlisted leader that led through example, so more of what I say, but what I do as the example for the men and women in our armed forces. And so I was asked a few years back, Sergeant Major Kennebeck and I just had a conversation about this because he was witness to this, and a few years back I was asked to come to an OCS commissioning ceremony right here in Camp Dodge. And the officer in charge was a guy named Phil Turner, who's now a lieutenant colonel, but in the 80s he was a young sergeant that worked for me in the 82nd Airborne Division, and he's got plenty of Troxell scar tissue all over him. But he wanted me to do a PT session on these cadets that were about to get commissioned and be officers in the great Iowa National Guard, and some of them were going to go on and lead troops in the 2nd Brigade of the 34th in Afghanistan in combat operations. And he said, hey, I want you to come in and put a healthy dose of scunion on these folks. So I had this big plan that had tires, rocks, ropes, chains, and all kinds of stuff to get after functional fitness on them. And I spent 2 hours out on a PT field at Camp Dodge trying to put some smoke on these wrestlers, football players, farmers, and all of the like that come from the great state of Iowa. And after about 2 hours, they had to shovel me off of the PT field because these young men and women were extremely physically, mentally, and emotionally hard. Now, I love all the states and territories, but that's an instant right there of what you get when you have the Iowa Guard involved in something, all right? So anyways, it's great to be here today. And I'm not alone. 2 of my best teammates in the armed forces are here today. Sergeant Major John Sampa, where you at? Please stand up. John, great to see you leading our great Army Guard. John, thanks. And standing next to him, I don't know if they're talking or not, but the Air National Guard Senior Enlisted Leader, Chief Master Sergeant Ron Anderson. Ron, great to see you here today. And also from Washington, D.C. with me is our Senior Enlisted Advisor to the Assistant or the Undersecretary of Defense for Manpower Reserve Affairs, also doubling in personnel and readiness, Sergeant Major Tracy Baroglio. Did I get it right? Yeah. So again, it's great to be here today. What I want to talk to you a little bit about is I kind of want to start at the strategic level and what's going on in our world, and then kind of whittle it down to what this organization is about, and kind of talk to you about the great things that our enlisted force, specifically what our National Guard troops are doing around the world, and then how we have to continue to invest in people to make sure that we meet the challenges of the operational environment today and in the future. So, and please humor me here, okay, if I'm talking something that you've known about for 30 years, please humor me here. But you know, our nation develops a national security strategy that is born out of the administration and is developed by the National Security Advisor to the President of the United States. And within that national security strategy, our Secretary of Defense takes out the portion that involves the Defense Department, and he develops the National Defense Strategy. And it kind of talks about what we think the primary threats to the United States of America, our allies, and our interests abroad might be. And for the latest National Defense Strategy, we kind of couched the threats in what we call a 2+3. The 2 meaning Russia and China. And what we thought is that because of the actions of Russia and China, we expect in the future that we're going to be in a period of long-term power competition, where not only will we have to have desired effects with these two countries short of conflict from a military perspective, but also with the other elements of national power. And the +3, 2 rogue nations that are regional actors trying to be global players, Iran and North Korea. And if you look at the Iranians right now and what they're doing in places like the Strait of Hormuz, where they now, to date, they have snatched up 2 civilian merchant vessels, one that was flagged by our great partners, the United Kingdom, but also because of the level of sanctions that we're putting on them, they're doing some malign activities that are trying to disrupt regionally what's happening in the Middle East, but also trying to do some things that will have effects globally. And this was all born out of us pulling out of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which was the nuclear agreement that was designed to make sure Iran was not going to become a nuclear power. And then the North Koreans, anybody here serve in Korea before? All right, anybody drink soju in Korea before? Anybody regret drinking soju in Korea before? All right. You know, sometimes partnering hurts, and the National Guard is the #1 component of building partnerships through our state partnership program. And if you're spending time in places like Korea, sometimes partnering hurts because not only do you have to go out and train your Korean allies, but you got to spend time with them after hours, and that can be pretty dangerous when it comes to what they like to drink and everything. But if you look at North Korea right now, I served for 27 months as the Command Senior Enlisted Leader of U.S. Forces Korea prior to becoming the SEAC. And I'm seeing some things out of North Korea now that I never thought I would see, which is Kim Jong-un traveling outside of his country. Kim Jong-un meeting with our President of the United States twice. Kim Jong-un dancing to South Korean K-pop music. Now, he doesn't do it very well, but I mean, I never thought I would see him doing things like that. So there's been a little change in what Kim is doing, where he's trying to show the world that, you know, he can be a global player, and he isn't this totalitarian dictator that the world has made him out to be. But in the end, when we say all that, he is still testing missiles, he still has nuclear capability, and he still has 750,000 troops on the demilitarized zone. Where on the other side, there's 28,500 Americans and about 400,000 ROCs, and we're still on the same standoff that we've been ever since the armistice in 1953. And then last but not least, violent extremist organizations. This is a generational threat that we're going to have to continue to counter, and we're going to have to continue to fight, and we're going to have to continue to deploy places around the world to make sure that this virus and this radical ideology does not continue to grow. I can tell you, I've been to Syria 3 times now, which the ISIS specifically said this is their geographical caliphate, and I can tell you that we have kicked the crap out of them severely so that they do not have this geographical caliphate. That doesn't mean that that threat is gone. They still have the ability to project attacks somewhat locally, but let there be no doubt they want to continue to grow and inspire people to become part of their organization and continue to project attacks into Europe and, in the end, the United States. So this threat is not going to go away. And when troops asking me about this kind of non-state actor, this terrorist insurgent organization, I tell them this. I have a 10-year-old grandson right now. And if he grows up and joins the military at 18 years old like I did, and he stays in this enterprise for 37 years like I have, he will still be facing this kind of radical ideology and this threat. So until we find a way to defeat the virtual caliphate that inspires people to want to be part of these organizations and the ability to get after that radical ideology itself, we will still have this challenge as we move forward. So our national defense strategy lays out, that's the threats that we think we have to get after with our nation. So my immediate boss, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Marine General Joe Dunford, who will be in position 30 September, he'll switch out, and General Mark Milley will become the 20th chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He develops the national military strategy, and this is how we're going to get after the threats that were defined in the NDS. And the key things that we look at now is force employment, force development, and force design for our national military strategy. In terms of force development, absolutely we have to have a force that can fight and win against a near-peer kind of threat and against any of these non-state actors or asymmetric kind of threats. And that means that we have to have a requisite readiness level in our active guard and reserve forces that can meet the nation's call when we need them to make it. But also, we have to be able to respond to any kind of activities or attacks. We have to be able to deter a strategic attack, meaning any kind of nuclear attack, deter a conventional attack, continue to assure our allies and partners, compete below the level of conflict, and in the end, as I mentioned before, we got to be ready to fight and win. So force development is force employment is something that is big on what we're doing now. And in terms of trying to have an effect on somebody like China and Russia, China is a nation that they want to rule the world, and they want to do it without having to shoot a single round of ammunition to do it. So this One Belt, One Road initiative they have, and their ability to be able to go into a country, a porous country, pour money into that company or into that country, and when that country cannot repay the debt, all of a sudden they start doing things like building ports and start building military facilities that they can project power in places outside of the Indo-Pacific area of operation. Right now, we've got some troops in Camp Lemonnier, Djibouti. We have plenty of guardsmen that are there right now. And what you may not know is right outside of Camp Lemonnier, right down the road, is a Chinese port that has about 10,000 sailors on it right now. So the Chinese have the ability to project maritime forces into the Suez Canal, the Bab al-Mandeb Strait, the Gulf of Aden, and all the way around into the Strait of Hormuz. So our force employment is going to be important. That means requisite forces that can do things like dynamic force employment, or can be a global response force, or be an emergency response force, whatever we need. But also, we got to continue to look on how we develop our forces. And that means that how we do planning, how we do decision making, how we do force management practices, we have to continue to change with the current operating environment to make sure we're at the cutting edge of where we need to be in terms of developing our force. And in terms of force design, that means we got to continue to innovate. We got to leverage technology, and we got to be able to look at doing things potentially different than we've been in the past. And I can tell you, we all are resistant to change. But we have to understand that as our potential adversaries continue to adapt how they do business and what they want to do to get after their goals in the world, that we have to change and adapt and be that force that can get after the things I talked about in force employment. So that's how we kind of build the strategy. And I can tell you, as I travel around the world and have been for the past 43 months, everywhere I go, I see men and women of the United States military doing great things. And when we look at these adversaries and we talk about how do we stack up against them in terms of competitive warfighting advantages or comparative warfighting advantages, even though we've been victims, victim might be a bad word, but I'm going to use it anyways, of unstable budgets and sequestration in the past and deferred modernization practices, and then how that kind of stuff affects our Compo 2 and 3 forces, the Guard and the Reserve, to be able to have the requisite readiness we need. Even with all of that, we still have competitive warfighting advantages in the ground, air, and maritime domains, the traditional domains. And we still have comparative advantages in the emerging domains like cyber, space, and nuclear. Anybody want to join the Space Force here? Ron Anderson, you're going to run it, right? Okay. Hey, here's what I hear about the Space Force. I was out visiting some troops one time, and I said, why do you want to join the Space Force? And he said, well, if you're in space, you're weightless, so you can't fail the body composition program if you're in space. I didn't think of it that way, all right? But, so we still have those comparative advantages, although some of them have atrophied because of our focus on violent extremist organizations over the last 18 years. But with the last 2 years' budgets and the budget we're about to get, $700 billion, $716 billion, and about to be $738 to $750 billion, we're able to continue to invest in these emerging domains so that we continue to have these advantages. But the greatest advantage we have over any adversary, and one that it will take light years for the Chinese, the Russians, the Iranians, the North Koreans, and certainly terrorists to catch up to us is in the human domain. No other nation in the world trains, educates, trusts, and empowers people like we do. And we do this through either standard or non-standard certification processes that allows us to execute mission command. That means leaders are able, through commander's orders, to apply disciplined initiative to the mission or problem set they have, use some agile and adaptive thinking and practices, and accomplish the mission without being micromanaged or supervised. And when it comes to the empowerment of an enlisted force, it isn't even close to what any other nation in the world does. And let me give you a couple examples as I travel around the world. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not here to bash officers, all right? Our system of officers, non-commissioned officers, and enlisted is a time-proven effort that gives us our greatest competitive advantage. And ever since we professionalized our non-commissioned officer corps, we have become the greatest force in terms of the human domain. So I'm in Raqqa, Syria, and I'm visiting some of our elite special operators. We were just having this conversation, the secretary up here being one himself, even though he doesn't have the Joe Dirt sideburns or mullet like some of those guys have, But we were having this discussion. So I get on the ground, and none of those guys tell you who they are. It's like, hey, I'm John Wayne Troxell, I'm the SEAC. Yeah, I'm Jeff. All right, Jeff. Or this is Mike. Or, this is whoever. And this guy was on the roof of the building. Now, at this point in time, this was the main effort for the United States military in the Defeat ISIS campaign. The lasting defeat of ISIS, this was the main effort that I was out visiting. And I'm on the rooftop of the building in this guy, and he's explaining to me how they're getting after ISIS, how they're empowering the Syrian Democratic Forces, how they're using other partner forces out there in terms of NATO countries that are assisting and everything. And every once in a while, he would drop an F-bomb. And I'm like, okay, this doesn't sound like a West Pointer here, or somebody that, comes up as an officer. So finally I said, look, dude, enough. Tell me what rank you are. He goes, well, I'm actually an E8P, and I'm about to get promoted to Sergeant Major. Now think of this. The number one effort in our strategy to defeat ISIS, and the person that is in charge on the ground leading the fight is a master sergeant promotable. No other nation in the world would put that kind of investment into building that non-commissioned officer, but more importantly, have a certification process that builds trust, and once we have trust, we can empower people. And oh, by the way, who was his counterpart for the Syrian Democratic Forces? It was a Kurdish female brigadier general. Almost unheard of in the Middle Eastern part of the country that you would have a female leading troops, let alone this coalition of Kurds and Arabs. And as I thought to myself on the roof of this building, and I looked at some of the folks that were there with me, I said, nobody in Washington, D.C. will believe this. Nobody, because there's a general lurking around here somewhere, There was an officer on the ground, I have to be serious. He was the surgeon, though, and he was down in the casualty collection point, all right? But my point is this. This just didn't happen overnight. The commander of that organization had built trust in the non-commissioned officers and trusted that that person could lead the fight there. Now, let me give you my guard reference here. So there I was. What are you supposed to say after that? Don't say it here. This is a G-rated. No kidding. There I was. I was in the Ukraine. Where's the California Guard at? All right. Okay. And so I go out there, and you got to understand what's going on in Ukraine. So when you talk about Russian disinformation and you talk about Russian malign activities, here they had moved in 2014 using contractors, these little green men. They had taken over Crimea. They had a lot of effort going in the Black Sea. And then they created this unrest in the eastern part of the country that led these Russian-led separatist rebels to start uprising against the Ukrainian military. And the Ukrainian military, a Russian kind of Soviet model of officers and other ranks, were struggling for leadership at the tactical level. So I go out here and I visit this training camp out there where these California Guard non-commissioned officers are out training Ukrainian non-commissioned officers on the aspects of leading tactical level units, fire team squads, platoons, things like that. And these NCOs would get trained, and they'd immediately go to the ATO, the Anti-Terrorism Operations Zone, to conduct operations against the Russians, the Russian-led rebels, I should say. And the level of performance at the tactical level for the Ukrainian forces improved drastically because of the state partnership program we had between the state of California and Ukraine. Now, because of the number of Russian forces out there and everything, the Ukrainians got a long ways to go to continue to defend their sovereignty. But here's another instance where we empowered non-commissioned officers to get into a country and assist them to continue to better their military as we move forward. And so as we continue to look at the world we live in and what we need to do to be prepared, it's evident that we have to continue to invest in our people. When you look at, I go back to the state partnership programs, and we have out of 196 countries, we got troops in 177 countries right now, to the tune of about 300,000 troops, and a lot of those troops are through this state partnership program. But I'll go visit an active force that's getting ready to deploy in a place they've never been before. Country, Botswana. Where's the North Carolina Guard at? Where are you guys at? Truly an army of one over here, all right? No. Where are you at, North Carolina? Raise up. Any Carolina Panther fans back there? All right, okay. That's all good. I'm a Carolina Panther fan, only because Iowa doesn't have a pro team. But anyways, this active unit, part of this enhanced forward presence package into Africa, was getting ready to go to Botswana, and I was visiting. And they were talking about, yeah, we're really going to have to get on the ground and figure this stuff out because, you know, there hasn't been a presence in Botswana in a long time. And I thought, how long has the North Carolina Guard been partnering with the country of Botswana? Years. So my point to this unit was, how about calling up the state sergeant major in North Carolina and you, I'm talking to the unit sergeant major, and you two guys talk and allow them to educate you on what they have going on. We learned this as well when we did the so-called rebalance in the Pacific. And we're going to put an active guard force back into the Pacific. Well, the Washington and Oregon Guard had never left. And so the active units wanted to continue to focus effort, and time out. I was the U.S. Army First Corps Sergeant Major at the time. I said, we're going to go down to Oregon and see a guy named Brunk Conley, who may be running around out here somewhere. He's retired now. And we're also going to see the Washington Guard guys, and we're going to figure out what they have going on out here and how we can work together to have the desired effect that we're trying to get after. So my message to you is this. As we continue to move forward in this very complex operating environment, arguably the most complex that we've had in the history of the United States military, and when you look at the requisite force that we need and the requisite talent we need to be able to do all the things that I spoke about earlier, things like assure, respond, compete, deter, and in the end, fight and win, we got to continue to invest in our people, and it's got to be a total force continuum kind of package of active forces, guard, and reserve as we move forward to make sure we have the force we need, and also an investment with our allies and partners. So I'll end by telling you this. The operational tempo that we have had and is going to continue to be the same. It may even grow for some organizations. As we continue to try and maintain readiness that we need against a near-peer kind of competitor in a fight, people like Iran and North Korea, and then you look at things that are unforecasted like Venezuela, the southwest border, and things like that. As we continue to push forward, try to keep readiness, but also continue to be able to get after the things that our nation needs us to get after, it's evident to me that even though we may not have all the resources, we may not have all the people, if we invest in the people that we do have, we will be best prepared for those challenges as we move forward. So I'm going to end there, and Sergeant Major, if anybody has any questions, I'm willing to take it. So thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions, comments?
Sergeant Major, first, thank you for being here. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here. We have some great people like yourself, Sergeant Major Preston, Sergeant Major of the Army Preston, Ron Anderson, John Sampa. Some of the leaders of our military are here. But we're surrounded by a lot of the next generation that are here. What would you say they need to look at to be able to be prepared to come take John, Ron, or your place in leadership cycles?
All right, thanks. So forgot Sergeant Major of the Army, Ken Preston. I didn't see you sitting back there. You're more camouflaged now in your, Joseph A. Banks suit now. But good to see you, Sergeant Major. I will tell you this. There is no substitute for having the greatest competitive advantage for an individual soldier, airman, or whatever, than being in the band of excellence, both personally, professionally, physically, mentally, emotionally, technically, and tactically. And in order for us to continue to be the best at what we do, 60% as a standard is not what we should be shooting for. We should be shooting for that 90% in every task that we have. And every day, to you folks back there, you got to think, are you prepared for the worst day of your life? Are you prepared if we have to face a high-end threat like North Korea, where there's 750,000 North Korean troops on the demilitarized zone, and all of a sudden, artillery rounds start landing in Seoul, 250,000 American expats are at risk, 10 million Koreans are at risk, and all of a sudden we have to employ forces on the Korean Peninsula. Are you prepared right now, physically, mentally, emotionally, technically, and tactically, for the worst day of your life? And if the question is, I don't know, then you got to get after being ready for the worst day of your life. And I don't care what you do in the military, there is no substitute to being at peak optimal performance levels in terms of, human performance. That means being physically ready for the demands of not just combat, but 18 to 20-hour days that you could be doing, regardless of what you're at. Mentally and emotionally, for the cost that comes with high-end conflict like that. And in the end, having the proficiency level, technically and tactically, to be able to perform your duties, and then as a part of a team, to the best of your ability, so that it is at that 90% level that allows us to continue to have that competitive advantage. So I'd say this to you back there. Every day, when you're wearing this uniform, you got to continue to prepare yourself. And there is no substitute every day than taking care of yourself physically, either through fitness or looking out for your health or how you eat, how you fuel yourselves, and things like that. I've been doing this for 37 years. And I got five months left, well, 4.5 months, and then I'm retiring after 38 years. But every day I wake up, how do I smoke myself today so that I can lead by example? And everybody should be looking at their leaders, and if their leaders are doing something, then they ought to try and emulate that. As a matter of fact, I had a relaxing 7-mile run along the river today, It's a little different running along this river than it is the Mississippi River in Davenport, especially now where I may need to have a life jacket when I'm down there. But the point being, to you troops back here, every day you got to validate your credentials to be prepared for the worst day of your life. And that could be in combat. That could be during a deployment. It could be every day, and all of a sudden you get a no-pay due. How do you take care of your family? How do you take care of paying the bills and everything? But it starts off by being able to get after this adversity that you may face in your life, and certainly that you may face during a deployment or combat. So my message to you is strive for excellence in everything you do. Shoot for 90%, and if you get 75, no problem. That's 15% better than 60. If 60 is a passing standard and we shoot for 60 in everything we do, 59, a failure, is only 1 point away. So be the best that you can be every day and prepare for the worst day of your life. Okay. Oh no, Ron Anderson is at the podium.
SEAC, first and foremost, your consistent leadership by example is appreciated, brother. Thanks for what you do every single day for all of us who wear stripes, personally and professionally. Thank you. I recently had the opportunity to go downrange with my boss down to Afghanistan and saw some of the great work our National Guard's doing in this space mission in particular, and they're affecting at a tactical level. I think a lot of us understand what that means at tactical execution level, but as you know better than anybody, we've evolved now to a formally named COCOM in space.
That's right.
Can you just walk us through a little bit about what it looks like today as a COCOM and where you think you and your boss are going to look to the future?
Yeah, thanks, Ron. So, you heard it best, okay? And the president stood up and said, we're going to create a space force. And so my staff, the staff I belong to, the Joint Staff and the Office of the Secretary of Defense, we went back and did the analysis and everything and said, all right, to create another service out of existing personnel, existing resources and everything was going to be tough for us to do right off the bat. So we came up with a plan that we'll create a U.S. Space Command, a combatant command that would focus on space as a warfighting domain, but also a space development agency that will allow us to look at technology and concepts that will allow us to compete in space, specifically with people like the Chinese and the Russians. And even we're looking now at some special operations stuff in space. Now that might be with some cyber professionals or things like that. But I think as you continue to look forward here, and it's open source information, the Chinese have put 300 anti-satellite devices in space. Now, don't get me wrong, to all you, war fighters out there that are kind of dog-faced like me, when I got into this job, I was a guy that was accustomed to pulling security on the roof, of a building. And all of a sudden, they started talking about space as a warfighting domain and everything, and I thought, wow, this stuff is all new to me. But what I didn't realize, it's the most contentious domain that we have in the world right now. The Chinese, about a decade ago said, hey, we're going to shoot down one of our satellites to see if we can do it, and they did it. And now with all these anti-satellite devices they have up there, and they're wanting to continue to do things that may retask the satellites that we have or potentially defeat them, and in terms of what that would do for our GPS and stuff for ballistic missile defense and things like that, it's clear to me that we have to have this effort that continues to allow us to have an advantage up there. So I think in the end, we're going to continue to build on SpaceCom right now. General Raymond has already been confirmed as a commander. Chief Master Sergeant Roger Toberman is the command chief. Toby was just at my Defense Senior Enlisted Leader Conference, getting him integrated with all the other COCOMs in the service senior enlisted. And there'll be IOC here, I think, around October with about 300 folks, and they'll continue to build to full operational capability here shortly after that. And then as we continue to move forward in the future, especially with expanded budgets, you're going to see the Space Force come to fruition as we move forward. And I think it's a great idea because when you look at what the Chinese and the Russians are doing in space, if we don't continue to get after this, we're going to be at a severe disadvantage. So thanks for the question. Anybody else? Okay. Well, again, to the leadership up here, thank you so much for allowing me to be here. To all of you out there, I'll leave you with three things. The three no's that I know right now, having served in this job for 43 months and advising the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and Secretary of Defense. I talked a lot about the challenges in the world we live in. I talked a lot about some of the challenges with unstable budgets and things, but the three things I know right now is that the United States military, our active guard and reserve forces, even with all of that, we can still defend our homeland and our way of life. Whether it's here or our interest abroad, we can still do that. We still can assure our allies and meet our alliance and partnership commitments. And last but not least, and it's the thing I talk to the most, we still have competitive and comparative warfighting advantages in every domain, but the best one we have is in the human domain. And we will continue to build on that by attracting, recruiting, and retaining the best talent in all compos of our force to make sure that we have that requisite force that can meet the demands that our country and our citizens need to defend our freedom and way of life. So thank you all. God bless you all, and I'll see you all out and about. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Sergeant Major Troxell, for those great words and all the information. Really, it's been an honor having you here. I just want to make sure I asked you to come back up here so I could give you a coin.
Oh, thank you so
And I
much.
appreciate so much that you were here with
Yes, ma'am.
our EANGUS members. Thank you.
Thank you, Sergeant Major. Thank you.
And I understand you're going to stick around this evening so everybody will be able to meet with you a little
Absolutely.
bit?
Yeah.
Come to some of our events?
Absolutely. I'll be here. I'm going back to D.C. Wednesday morning, so I look forward to interacting with everybody.
Great. All right.
And we can do some PT tomorrow, too. So,
Okay, there you go. Sorry, I won't be there, but.
Oh, no.
I know
In
I think there's some younger guys that.
Well,
can
in
join
5
you.
months, those
Guys,
folks in
yeah.
the back got the con because I'm going to go off in retirement and have a grandchild in one hand and a Miller Lite in the other. So,
All right.
thank you very much.
Sergeant at Arms, please escort our distinguished guests from the podium. Thank you.